Open your Bible to Hosea, little book back there in the Old Testament. And I started in this week kind of having in mind what I thought this sermon was going to be about. And then I got in there visiting with God and digging around, and there's all kinds of stuff here. So it went a little different direction. So actually I want to start with the benediction this morning. It's a benediction that we use quite often here in our church. It's found in Numbers 6. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you, be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom. And the last time I preached, it was on Resurrection morning. And I preached from John chapter 20, and the resurrected Jesus, the first thing we have recorded him saying after his resurrection to his disciples is that identical word, peace be with you. So I want you to know there's like maybe 1,500 years between when Aaron, under God's direction, said, tell the people my peace will be with them. And then 1,500 years, and he used words, it would have been shalom, and when Jesus spoke, it was the identical word 1,500 years later, saying, peace be with you. I want you to just think about that for a minute. The provision of God, the truth of God, the message of God does not change over a lifetime, 10 lifetimes, 100 lifetimes, the length of time that humanity has been on planet Earth. His intent, his purpose, his provision for people who are scared, frustrated, lost, displaced, undone, unhinged, whatever the case may be, is that we have his shalom with us. But you also need to know that there is a false peace as well as the genuine. So some of us pastors went down to the Capitol in Denver this last week, and it just happened to be that this was the state religious freedom day. And so in the Capitol building there, they had a number of religious leaders and our beloved governor come to share about religious freedom. And I thought as I listened to some of those, the words sound good, but I know enough about this and this religion and this guy to know that that's not the same thing that this book talks about in terms of peace. And in fact, God notes that as well through scriptures. He says, there will be people coming saying, peace, peace, and there is no peace. So we need to be aware of that. It's a both and. There's both truth and untruth when you hear the word peace, depending on who says that. And even with God, there are two sides to this peace that God offers. So for instance, the word peace is used only 2 times in the book of Revelation. The beginning, where John says, as Paul does with many of his letters, he says, grace and peace be with you. God's presence, God's provision, God's well-being. But then a few chapters later, those 4 horsemen arrive on the scene. A white one, false Christ. The second horse that shows up is a red horse. And it says this about the rider there. He will be given the power to take peace from the earth. He will slay people with a great sword. So here is this word peace. Here's this concept of peace. Which is it? Has Jesus and God come to bring peace? Or is it somebody with a big sword ready to kill everybody? Well, that's this both and aspect of many things that God says. So, do we have the slide up there? Put that up on the screen. Yes, I'm talking about there it is. Okay, this is, I don't know my little pointer here, it isn't working very good. This is the Assyrian Empire when Hosea lived, 7th and 8th century BC. Here is Jerusalem. Where it says Israel there is where this takes place, the story of Hosea that we're going to read. And the Assyrian Empire conquered the northern tribes of Israel. And it was at this point that they had divided. And Judah, although it shows here that the Assyrian Empire has come down and covered that, they didn't quite. But they did come down the coast and conquer the land of Egypt. But Judah, if you remember, one of the most dramatic stories in the Bible is where an Assyrian army, just like you see there, and it's hard for us to imagine, but to me, it's kind of like a big vulture hanging over this little country of Judah. And they came down with their big army. And how many of you know the number in the Bible of soldiers that were killed in that battle? 185,000. I mean, that's kind of a, wait, that's a whole army gone from this big empire, and they were stopped right there just north of Jerusalem. And so they backed off. But the northern 10 tribes were conquered. And Hosea ministers to these tribes in the north. So he very likely saw this happen during his lifetime. Let me tell you also a little bit in history of the nation of Israel. They had peace probably all during the Old Testament times, maybe only 300 or 400 years out of 1,500 years. So from when they went to Egypt and became from a clan to a nation, and then they were enslaved in Egypt, and then they were set free in the Exodus, and then they made it to the Promised Land, and there it was back and forth between a few years of freedom, and then they would slide back into slavery from one tribe to another, and then another judge would come along and set them free, and they'd say, yes, we're going to follow you this time, God. We're going to be faithful to you. And then, no, they didn't. And they went back into slavery. Back and forth, back and forth. So from Moses' time to the New Testament, approximately 1,500 years. And then, as you know, the nation was destroyed by Rome, and there was no nation for the next 2,000 years until 1948. And they became a nation again. So you put those two together, that's 3,500 years, and just a very small fraction of that time, 300 years, maybe 400, divided here and there, David's kingdom, Solomon's kingdom, some of those judges. Some of the time there, between the Old Testament and New Testament, were they free and had their own identity, their own rules, their own kings to rule them freely. Now think of America. We're getting ready to celebrate our 250th birthday. Yeah, it's not much compared to Israel, is it? Been around 3,500 years. I want you to just think, when you see this map, that they lived under the threat of being destroyed almost all of their existence. As it is today. Today, this very day, you know there's a whole bunch of people across the world. They aren't all in the Mideast either. There's a bunch of people in our country who want to do away with the Jewish nation, the Jewish state. So, this has been their history. to live under the threat of annihilation. And we would say, well, no country has ever suffered as much, no ethnicity, as the Jewish people. And it continues this day. Now with that, let's go to Hosea. Verse 1. The word of the Lord which came to Hosea, would be how you pronounce his name more than Hosea, but we use that. The son of Beri, during the days of, and here's the kings that ruled, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. That's the southern king of Judah. And during the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. It was chaotic when Hosea lived. There were the northern tribes had 19 total kings during their independent existence. Every one of them was evil. Every one of them. You know, we get depending on your viewpoint, a good president and a bad president and a mediumly this or that, you know. But every one of their kings were evil. And at this point in time, one of those kings was only king for 1 month. Another one was only king for 6 months. Jehu was not listed here, but one of those kings in this time period. And you know, when he came to power, he killed everybody else of a rival of Ahab's family. It says 70. He had 70 sons. Killed them all. That was typical. That's what was going on here. That was the chaos and the darkness and the fear. That was just within the kingdom. But then here's Assyria ready just to drop down on them, and he actually did. The nation actually did. Okay, that's verse 1. Verse 2. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go take to yourself a wife of harlotry," depending on your translation, you may have a different word there, "and have children of harlotry. For the land commits flagrant harlotry, forsaking the Lord." Now this is strange, isn't it? We would say, well, no, God doesn't do this. What is this? And the argument with theologians and those who wax eloquent in studies beyond what I know say, well, his wife wasn't a prostitute when he married her. And others will say, no, she was. She wasn't. She was. I don't know. But he married this lady, and she is identified, depending on your translation, as a prostitute, as one who commits adultery or uses the word whoredom or harlotry. This is vivid. I think we get this. I think we understand in our better moments of our culture that committing adultery is wrong. I don't think most people have any problem saying, yeah, that's the wrong thing to do. God is looking at, though, a bigger picture, a spiritual reality. We wouldn't have gotten so easily, except God used this physical adultery, harlotry, to expose this bigger picture. So because we understand this on a physical level, I don't think it's too hard to make a jump here to say, oh, you mean we're supposed to be faithful to God, and we've committed spiritual adultery by worshiping, and just put in there whatever you want. Money, fame, power, sex, the Broncos, it just goes on and on, doesn't it? So we get it. I think we get that when we say what God is really trying to teach is this bigger picture. Verse 3. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diablaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Now, in this story, names here are important. I think the name of her father has a story to tell. Diblaim. Diblaim. I can't pronounce it either. But don't have time to get into that name. But I do want to talk about the word Gomer. It means complete or completion or the end. It is only used 6 times in the Bible, and all 6 of those refer to a proper name, Gomer. 5 of them are male, and then this one here as a female. So let me read the first time this word is used, and it's talking about the sons of Japheth. That's Noah, after the flood, and you know, only those 8 survived. He and his wife, their 3 sons, and their wives. So there in Genesis 10 it says this, the sons of Japheth, this would be Noah's grandsons now, were Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshach, and Tiras. And then those names are referred to again a time or 2, and then they show back up later, the same name in the book of Ezekiel, where it's talking about the end of times, and you know, where all those end time battles are going to be. Again, a lot of prophecy there. The etymology from this word Gomer is also only used 5 times in the Bible. And again, it is the word, the end result. And I'm going to read a couple of those scriptures. They're all in the book of Psalms. Psalm 7 verse 9 says this, "Oh, let the evil of the wicked come to an end." And that's this word from which we get the word Gomer. Come to an end. But establish the righteous. And then a little further on in the book of Psalms, it says this, "I will cry to God Most High, to God who accomplishes," and that's this word again, "to God who accomplishes all things for me." So this word has a connotation of there's going to be an end. There's going to be a completion. Now, for evil people, it will be destruction. For those who walk with the Lord, it will be this eternal life and goodness and righteousness. So all of that there is in this word, Gomer. And we don't see that so much when we just read through the Bible. In fact, our Gomer is a TV program, isn't it? Of years gone by. But I want you to understand this. And I wrote some notes on the back of the bulletin, and I'll give you some scriptures here in a little bit if you want to put in some additional information here. The irony of this woman, his wife, this adulteress, Gomer, as completed. But you look at her life, and her life is in fact very incomplete. It is very much a story of a broken and not working right kind of situation, relationship. So here's the name completed, and here's the woman broken. It's not complete. There needs some fixing here. And how those two play against each other. And yet, let me continue. Verse 3, and then I'm going to go into verse 4. "So he went into Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And the Lord said to him, name him Jezreel." And we're going to talk about that for a little bit. But I want you to notice it says here in the grammar, she bore him a son. This is his biological son, Jezreel. And you see the note I have there. That word means God sows. Jim, you mentioned when you came up to pray earlier that God sows a thought or a seed in your heart. And he does that, doesn't he? And we can illustrate that and look, oh, look at this. Somebody just by chance left the pine cone in. Seeds. My little internet search said there's an average of about 100 seeds on a pine cone. There's an average of about 150 pine cones on a tree. And we have somebody run out and count the trees out here just on our property. We have a lot of pine cones, don't we? Isn't this God overkill planting pine trees? We don't need this many seeds, do we? And yet there they are. Now that's not all about just the pine trees. As I looked a little further, it says that when pine trees get stressed, when they get attacked by pine beetles or fire or drought, they make more pine cones. I would have thought, well, they're making less because they're under stress. Well, they make more pine cones. What is God trying to say just through pine cones? And then once every 3 to 7 years, my little quick study said that they produce a bumper crop of pine cones. Just because there are so many things attacking pine trees, and God says, I want to make sure I have enough seeds to make more pine trees. You find that interesting? You find that interesting that I could have picked one of those Russian thistles, and we get those all over, don't we? Or dandelions. Too many seeds. What are you trying to do, nature? Nature's God. And even in the Bible, if you have the old King James Version, it talks about men and their offspring, Adam's seed, Moses' seed, all the descendants. Do you see a principle here? Do you see a God here who sows abundantly, more than enough? It is never just one little seed here and one little seed over here and down the road one little seed here. You plant wheat, you plant a lot of it, wheat seed. Anything you want to name, and there it is. But now let's take this very physical thing, which we understand, and say, I wonder if the God who made this so unique, I wonder if there's some kind of spiritual sowing and reaping. And of course there is, isn't there? Another one of those minor prophets, Haggai, said this to the people: you have sown much, but you harvest little. You eat, but you never have enough food to be satisfied. You drink, but you never have enough drink to be satisfied. You wear clothing, but you never have enough clothing to keep warm. You go out and earn wages, but you put it in a purse or a bag with holes in it. So you never have enough money. I want you to contrast what we do with what God does. God says, I'll make enough pine cones so that you'll never run out. You'll have more. More than you possibly could use. Because that's who I am and that's how I work. We come along and say, in a spiritual sense, I will work hard and gain a lot of money. I will, by my strong effort, I will go out there and put all I have into a job or a career or whatever it is, and I will have an abundance. And God says, unless you follow me, all your money goes into a bag and falls out the bottom. If you have an interest, and this would be a good place to write a little reference down there under Jezreel, just put Deuteronomy 28. And God is very graphic and very descriptive over the way He does things and how He blesses. But then if we don't follow Him, how that turns totally upside down. And every effort we go through and everything we want to make, it just disappears. Instead of prosperity, we will have poverty. Instead of being the ruler of nations, we will be the tail and in subjection to nations. And it goes on and on there pretty graphically. And then I think most of you remember the pretty quick way Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Moth and rust and thieves can't get to that. But if you store up on earth, there the moth and the destruction and the rust and the corruption and all the things that happen to our stuff. Our brand new car that all of a sudden starts rusting, doesn't work quite right. It goes away. So this is all wrapped up in this name that He names His Son, Jezreel. God sows. God is out there providing abundance. God is out there providing protection. All of those sorts of things for us. But Jezreel, you might know, is also a place. So let me talk about that for just a moment. It's not very far from where Jesus grew up in Nazareth. There's a valley there called the Valley of Jezreel. I think Jesus could easily, as a boy, have walked not very far and stood not very far from Nazareth and looked out over this valley of Jezreel. It was where King Saul lost his final battle and was killed. It is where that very interesting story of Naboth and his vineyard and how Ahab the king took that away from him and set him up to be executed. And his wife Jezebel plotted together. And earlier in the book of Judges is where one of the, a set of judges, Deborah and Barak, won a battle. And that's where you might remember the infamous story of Jael. Took a tent peg and drove it through an enemy general's head. Some pretty exciting stories in the Bible, aren't there? This is where Gideon and his little tiny army defeated a great big army in this valley of Jezreel. This is where King Josiah, one of the last really good kings of Judah, died in battle. And this is a place less than 1,000 feet high, a little hill, a little mountain called Megiddo is that. And what we know as Armageddon, which will be one of the final battles on planet Earth. This is all wrapped up in this word, Jezreel. It has all kinds of implications. And God says, name your son that. Let me go on. I'll read 4 again. And the Lord said to him, name him Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will punish the house of Jehu for the bloodshed of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. On that day, I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. And so that happened in history. Hosea could say, look at all that has happened here before. Look at what is coming ahead. Look what this means, this word God sowing and then reaping. All of that kind of thing. Going on, verse 6. Then she conceived again and gave birth to a daughter, and the Lord said to him, name her Lo Ruhamah. And you have the meaning of that word on the back of your bulletin there. For I will no longer have compassion on the house of Israel, that I would ever forgive them. Wait. I thought God would forgive us no matter what. Did I misread that? I'm not going to have compassion on the house of Israel that I would ever forgive them. Verse 7, but I have compassion on the house of Judah and deliver them by the Lord their God, and will not deliver them by bow, sword, battle, horses, or horsemen. And I said earlier, the Assyrian army went after them, and 185,000 were killed in one night. Verse 8, when she had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, she conceived and gave birth to a son. And now you see here that this isn't calling them Hosea's children. Someone else was the father. This adultery on a human level is playing out. And the Lord said, verse 9, name him Lo-Ami, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. And you see the name of that on the back of the bulletin. It's the word not and the word mine, or people. That's not my son. That's somebody else's son. So here we go. Harlotry. Adultery. You have followed as a nation other gods. And there's a consequence for that. What you sow, you reap. Don't we understand that? If we were at a nursery somewhere and we wanted to grow pine trees, we would not start with wheat seed, would we? Or watermelon, we'd start with these seeds. And you understand that's true spiritually. I think that's part of what God is saying here. Verse 10. Yet the number of the sons of Israel will be like the sand of the sea. Wait, he just said he's not going to ever forgive them in verse 6, and now he somehow seems to be coming back. But it's this sowing thing, like the sand of the sea, like pine cone seeds everywhere, which cannot be measured or numbered, and in the place where it is said to them, you are not my people, it will be said to them, you are the sons of the living God. And the sons of Judah and the sons of Israel will be gathered together, and they will appoint for themselves one leader, and they will go up from the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel, when God sows and when the harvest takes place. It may be a while. 17 years ago, Eli was right there in that pew. And he had just come through a H1N1 flu. It could have taken his life. 5 years old, I think. And he'd gotten through that. And I picked him up as a little guy and said, see what God has done? And he just wiggled back down in the pew. He didn't want to even notice. But look at him now. Full grown, walking with the Lord, about to get a degree, step out into the world and fight the fight of living for Jesus. It takes a while to reap what is sown, doesn't it? Now maybe a dandelion is, poof, it's here right now, but it doesn't last long, does it? But when God wants to sow His word, His truth into our lives, it takes a while. It takes a while of working with that, nurturing that, praying over those little people when they get a disease that might take their life, or when the threats happen around. All of you have people that you love. All of you have things that you are working through in your life right now. God is sowing things in your life. Some of those are very, very difficult. And some of those, due to our temptation, are kind of contaminants. They pollute our life. This story, in these 11 verses, is a story of God saying, I will sow good seed in your life. And Jesus comes along and tells his stories in the New Testament. You know, a sower went out to sow, and it was good seed. Daniel, when you witness the people out there in the world, it's good seed. Some of it doesn't bear fruit because there's weeds and thistles and all kinds of things. Jesus told another story about the farmer who sowed good seed in his fields. And it was growing up, and all of a sudden his farmhand said, "Wait, what is this growing with the wheat? It's weeds, too. What happened?" He said, "Well, an enemy has done this." And we know about that, don't we? There is a spiritual battle going on in your life, in my life, in our world, in our culture. I have recommended to you the movie Great Awakening. And that starts by the Continental Congress sitting there in a convention to come up with the Constitution. And they're fighting. They won the Revolutionary War, but now they're fighting among the 13 colonies about you're getting more than we're getting and we should have this and no you shouldn't and we should do it this way. Fighting. That's what's being sown in our world. Even in Christian places. I have had a pastor that I watched on TV a few times, and I thought he was really good. Big mega church. And then all of a sudden it came out that he had moral failure that had never been dealt with. That had been sown in his life. And the result was that he lost his ministry, lost everything. Even went to jail over it. When I went to seminary in 1970s, there was a revival called the Asbury Revival that really swept across the nation. And then I went back 50 years later to our 50th anniversary of that, and I walked back on that campus, and there was another revival. This is just a few years ago, and you had heard about it in the news, in college campuses and a lot of places. And I walked into the chapel where I had sat there 50 years ago, and I sensed a heavy presence of God. That's such a neat time. Wow. And it wasn't a get up and yell kind of thing and celebrate, just God, your presence is here, so powerful. And then I was given a book that kind of documents what happened 3 years ago in that recent Asbury revival. And it's kind of a look behind the scenes. And did you know people came from all over the world, and even networks like NBC and CNN, and not just the Christian ones came and said, "What is happening here?" The lines of people and the all-night prayer meetings and the confessions and people getting right with God. But behind the scenes, there was an enemy sowing discord, pride, ego kinds of things. Who's getting the credit for this? Now, the revival went on, but it's just significant to me that every time God does good things, God sows good seed, there is an enemy. You need to know this, who is out to destroy you, who is out to put weeds and contaminants and depression and suicide. Such a big thing in our culture, suicide. Guess what? God is still sowing good seed into your life and my life. So Paul comes along in century 1, and there in that magnificent 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians says this: "So also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown a perishable body. It is raised up an imperishable body." I want you to know that that's what God is doing if you'll let Him. He's doing that very thing. And when it's all over, crowns await us. I asked William if we could sing that song, Crown Him with Many Crowns. It's in almost every hymnal. We have 6 or 7 hymnals at home, and it was in every one of them. But it's interesting how that story came about. That actually has 12 verses. 12 verses. The guy who originally wrote it was a Protestant clergyman, and then he converted to Catholicism. He wrote 6 verses. Another guy came along later who was a Protestant, and he wrote 6 more verses. Let me just read you how those verses start. Crown him with many crowns, that's in our hymnal. Crown him the Virgin Son. Crown him the Lord of Lords, that's in our, the Lord of Love, that's in our hymnal. Crown him the Lord of Peace. Crown him the Lord of Years. Crown him the Lord of Heaven, that's in our hymnal. Crown him with crowns of gold. And then I'm just going to read you this whole verse. Crown him the Son of God before the world began. And you who tread where he has trod, crown him the Son of Man, who every grief has known that wrings the human breast. That's us. You have griefs. You have pain. You have hurts. And takes and bears them for his own, that all in him may rest. The next verse is crown him the Lord of light, crown him the Lord of life, crown him the Lord of lords, and then the last verse, again, a different word, but crown him the Lord of heaven. One more thing, when all things are completed, we will have a crown. When we're done, when God has sown good seed in our life and we have nurtured that and let that drive our life, we are going to get a crown. In the Bible, there are several words for crown, and the one that fits to us humans, it's a Greek word, Stephanos, which is where we get the name Stephen. That means a victor's crown. You have fought this fight, and you have won, and you get a crown. But there's another word for crown in the Bible, and often is translated diadem. That's different. That means power and authority. And then, again, back in the book of Revelation, that word is used a few times, but you might be surprised. In Revelation chapter 12, it says that there is a dragon who has 7 heads, and there's a diadem, authority on each one of those. And then in the next chapter it talks about a beast, and he has 10 diadems. I want you to know that there is a fight going on, and there is an enemy with some power and authority on planet Earth. It's not his own. He has taken it wrongfully. But then, at the end of the book of Revelation, it says Jesus rises in, and on his head are many diadems, and he will vanquish all the faults, all the weeds that were sown in our lives, and all of that kind of thing. Well, what do we do with this? I know we have a short attention span. Somebody said we have the attention span of a goldfish, 8 seconds. Then somebody else came along and said, well, my study shows we only have a 4-second attention span. So you have done well to listen to me this morning. But I want your attention span to go beyond 8 seconds. I want your attention span to take the reality that God is sowing into your life through the good times, through the hard times, through the drought times, through the blessing times. His word, his life, his presence. Let that grow. Let that run. Let that develop. Walk with Jesus. One day a king is coming. The world doesn't think so. that Jesus is coming back. When he's done sowing all his good seed in the world, when Satan has done all the damage he can do with the weeds of the destruction, Jesus is going to reign, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. I want to be on the side of Jesus. Let that good seed grow. So praise team, come and let's sing our closing song and have our benediction. And we're not done with Hosea. We'll come back next week and see how this story developed if you don't know it already. So stand together and let's sing.